Oil pastel is a relatively new medium for me. I started a couple months ago and things really took off after I purchased the Munio oil pastels and got these two art books. I first started with the Monet art book, copying poppies in the field, water lilies, and some other landscape art. And so today will be part art history study and part oil pastel study. So for Monet, between 1878 and 1882, for the only extended period, he concentrated on still lifes. And so this fruit platter that you can see was the only still life in the book that I had, and I didn't even know Monet did flower vase studies until I saw this print on the left in a coffee shop, though obviously Monet is known for his water lilies and painting flowers. But Renoir, which is the next art book that I had, was known prolifically for his flower vase paintings and did almost 50 of them, which I'm showing some examples on the screen. But I was astounded by his flower paintings when I came across them, and I've already done some of them in oil pastel, which you can see are up on the screen. So I went on a Europe trip a couple months ago, and I went to a ton of museums in Paris, and there were so many paintings of flower vases. So these ones that you can see are by Van Gogh, Manet, and Renoir, and two lesser known artists. So at this point, I was very drawn to these flower paintings, and I was wondering why so many impressionistic artists were painting these. And so the first artist I wanted to focus on was the French painter Edouard Manet. And I saw two of his paintings in the museums that I went to, but he dedicated 1/5 of his artistic output to still lifes, and he said that still life is, quote, the touchstone of painting, end quote. So in 1880, nearing the end of his life, Manet especially focused on flowers and in bouquets, and he created a series of 16 small canvases that chronicled the bouquets his flowers had given him on his sickbed. And I'm going to show some of them up on the screen now, but this was really remarkable to me, just the different types of emotion that are put towards wanting to paint flowers and how it can be so varied. And so the next painter that I wanted to focus on was Van Gogh. And most people know Van Gogh for his sunflower paintings, and I don't think a lot of people know he painted quite a few other still lifes of other flower bouquets. But one of the things that I was curious about when researching this was why sunflowers. I'm going to link all of these websites that I found with this information in the notes, but the thing that I found about sunflowers was when Van Gogh had a particularly dark period, he spent some time in an asylum, and during his stay in the hospital, he apparently longed for the countryside of his upbringing, and he revealed to his brother that during his illness he had seen in his mind the house and the garden of where he grew up, and he had painted this site from memory in a picture that showed his mother and sister in this flower-filled garden, which included dahlias and sunflowers. And he later imagined a portrait with two sunflower works of this lady and sunflowers, I guess. But it was the particular features and character of the sunflower that apparently attracted Van Gogh to it. So it's, quote, the vibrant color that he liked, but it's also the form. One of the art historian said about him, I guess. And he said the sunflower is a very strong and sturdy plant. It's not elegant and refined, and called it the rustic sunflower. So it has the roughness and unpolishedness of the countryside. And so Van Gogh, would come to produce a total of 11 sunflower still lifes, and some of them were painted for various reasons, but he wrote his brother in a letter that the sunflower is mine. So that was kind of what he wanted to be known for. So the next artist that I wanted to talk about is Cezanne. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. And he was a post-impressionistic artist who is considered one of the preeminent still life painters in the history of Western art, but his contribution is not very widely known or appreciated. But Cezanne's floral still lifes were regarded very highly during his own lifetime, In fact, he included 3 floral compositions in the first major exhibition of his work. One of them, as I'm putting up on screen, is the vase of tulips, which were, strong, spiky flowers, which differentiate from more sensual or impressionistic floral life, representing chrysanthemums, daffodils, irises, etc. The next impressionistic painter is Pissarro, and he produced over 1,500 works, but only 20 of them were still life. And some of the ones I have up on screen were likely created in artistic rivalry with his friend and pupil Paul Cézanne, who I just talked about. The next artist that I wanted to talk about the reasoning for which they painted flowers was Renoir. So I talked about him earlier, and I created another study of one of his flower vase paintings. But in regards to why Renoir chose this subject, he said, and I quote, "Painting flowers lets my brain rest. It does not cause the same tension of spirit as when I face a model. When I paint flowers, I put down tones. I boldly try values without having to worry about losing a canvas." And he was particularly fond of roses, whose full, rounded shapes he likened to the female body. And I resonate well with this quote because I also find that just painting in general makes my brain rest. So the painting that I haven't talked about up until this point is a study of Monet's sunflowers. He created many paintings, but I quite like this one for its contrast of colors. And I was also curious why Monet created these paintings. And like I said, I was going to talk about, it was primarily following what was popular at the time. And when I researched, I found that France at the end of the 19th century, with its growing band of art dealers, also had a decent market for flowers in vases, which is kind of funny. Impoverished artists like Claude Monet, Monet didn't have a lot of money at certain points of his life, saw, the commercial aspect of making such works because it was popular, and of course liked the simplicity of a flower vase. And so around 1880, Monet focused on still lifes. But once his landscapes started to sell, he completely stopped with still lifes, but not before painting the sunflower. And in 1881, he painted a handful of them, which I believe is this painting that I'm showing up on screen, that growed near a path in his garden in Bethule. Don't know how to pronounce that. But in 1888, I thought this was funny. Van Gogh wrote how his pupil Gauguin had told him of Monet's paintings of a sunflower, but that he preferred Van Gogh's version. So I don't have experience with oil paints, and most of this video is an oil pastel study, and I've done all of my Monet and Renoir studies in oil pastel, and it's just a really freeing medium for me, and I really like that I can experiment with colors, blending, and other techniques that I just can't do with watercolor and gouache. So I want to talk a bit about my process for, doing these oil pastel paintings. I just recorded this, and for some reason my phone decided to not pick up literally anything I just said, so I have to record it again. But yeah, so I really enjoy this type of oil pastel painting because it's just, I can do so much that's outside of my comfort zone when it comes to watercolor. Like, I would never try and do a vase painting like this with watercolor because for some reason my skills with watercolor doesn't really do well with flowers, especially flowers in vases. I don't really know why that is, but I think because the oil pastel, I like to kind of throw colors, just on the page. I usually start with the darker colors first because in these oil pastels, the lighter colors tend to blend better on top of the darker colors, which is why at the beginning, I put the blue and black down first and then layered the red on top of it because it blended better that way. I can do the same with these flowers. I'm, going in with the really bright yellow here, but I already put down some of the darker, more mid-tones of the sunflowers before I, went in with this yellow. And it's just really fascinating to me how differently you can create something with different mediums. For example, I did, a black and white painting that I, videoed on my channel, I guess, a couple videos ago. But I would never attempt something like that with oil pastel because it's just so different, and I wouldn't be able to get any of the small details with oil pastel like I can with watercolor. And again, I would never attempt something like this with watercolor because I feel like I can't get that, whimsical background with the blending and the layering of the colors with watercolor. It's just a different vibe to me. But I also want to talk about, I found these recordings that you could download, the classical music recordings that I am playing in the background of this video, through this website called classicals.de. I'm going to put it in the notes, but it's a really awesome place if you need some classical music downloads and want them for free. So that was pretty awesome. Another thing I wanted to briefly discuss is kind of the idea of painting directly from an inspiration, or, doing a study based on something an artist has already created versus, doing it off of maybe a picture that you took or your own brain ideas. And for oil pastel, at least for me, the difference is very, very apparent. I've been doing Monet studies for a bit, and they're all really interesting to me, and I seem to be able to capture it really well in oil pastel. But I tried to do a landscape of something that I just took a picture of, and it actually failed miserably. So I'm not sure if it's my own worries going into the painting that, kind of throw me off more than it should. I'm not really sure what it is, but at least for these flower vase paintings, I kind of want to try and actually, create one based on like an actual flower vase. So, for example, like my friend just had a concert and I took a bunch of pictures of some of the flower vases that she received. And I'm really interested to see if I can create the same kind of whimsy and magic that I can recreating these, really famous artists based on something that I can actually see. And I'm just really curious, like, how these artists decided to use these, like, pastel backgrounds and, the contrast choices. I don't know how you actually get into that type of thing and how you actually decide to do that. And I'm assuming that, this, like anything else, will probably just take practice. And I'm going to have to try it a couple times in order to actually, get the same kind of results. But it's kind of hard to compare yourself to, like, somebody like Monet, who he did so many paintings, and he did so well at creating contrast in his color choices and his composition choices that it's just, like, mind-boggling to even try and replicate it. So we will see. I might try and post a video of that, or I just might attempt it a couple times and see if I can actually get anywhere. But I hope this video was informative. I really enjoyed kind of researching why these different artists did these flower vase paintings and like the different ones that they did and how different they are and stuff like that. And I also hope that this video of me drawing this flower vase was also interesting. I had a really fun time doing it, and I really enjoyed literally everything that Monet does. So I hope you also found it interesting. But whether or not I'll be posting again soon is TBD, because I kind of all over the place in terms of my artistic adventures. So we will see. But I'm just gonna let the last of the video play, but again, I hope it was interesting or informative.